we can visualize a specific future that we desire and then work the information backward to make us today what we need to be to achieve that future.
But that sounds insane. So how are you doing that? This interview was filmed at a stage talk at Mind Valley University by the spiritual physicist Nassim Haramein. Watch it because it's controversial, yes, and you don't have to agree with everything Nassim says, but some of his ideas might absolutely fascinate you. Nassim said this: spirituality is nothing more than physics we have yet to find an equation for. Love him or disagree with him, Nassim Haramein is worth listening to. Check this out. Hi Nassim, firstly I want to say it's such an incredible honor to have you here at Mind Valley University in Tallinn.
Thank you, it's an honor to be here.
And for those of you who don't know the background of this, Nassim got on stage and delivered 6 hours of an incredible workshop to some 650 Mind Valley students here at Kulttuuri Katel in Tallinn, Estonia. And it was amazing. And so let's start with this question. What is consciousness to you?
To me, consciousness is the fundamental information structure of the universe. Information moving through its cycles, feed forward, feedback information throughout the whole network of creation that produces complexity, like a 100 trillion cell human being that eventually becomes self-aware. It's something fundamental to creation, and it's occurring everywhere. And it's occurring in the chair, it's occurring in the table, and it's occurring in us.
So what makes us different then from a chair or a table, if consciousness is everywhere?
The structure and the complexity of the information in us reach a level in which we became self-aware. We, like all the minerals and the water, like we're big sacks of water with minerals in it, kind of got together in a particular way with particular level of complexity that made us have a bog rate so high, like have so much information moving through that we eventually became aware that we were aware.
So that leads to an interesting question, right? Which is, which came first? Did consciousness come first, and then consciousness create the universe, thus God, or universal energy, or universal intelligence? Or did the universe start, and then consciousness emerge from the universe? What is your view?
My view is that whenever you have a chicken or an egg problem,
right,
it's most likely both. That is, the concept of a beginning and an end is a human concept. In fact, in the universe, we haven't seen any such thing ever, meaning we don't see protons just disappearing, going away. We don't see energy just disappearing. We don't see information just disappearing. We just see things going through cycles. So the idea that there was a beginning and there will be an end is really a linear concept that we've made up. The universe is probably, and this is something, when I discovered this, I was alone in a van for some 5 years, and it was the conclusion of some approximately 4 years into it of writing physics and studying and all this, and I had to actually stop researching for a while because it took me a while to be able to deal with that concept, to integrate. I don't think that it's consciousness creating matter or matter creating consciousness. In fact, when you study matter, you have a hard time finding something like a billiard ball you call a particle or something. You just see field interaction, you just see information exchange. And so really I think it's just a feedback and feed forward loop that continues to infinity.
Right, I've never thought about it this way. So even if, in other words, it's an irrelevant question. Because if the Big Bang started and matter was produced by the Big Bang, matter is ultimately energy. That energy has a form of consciousness because energy contains information. And since time doesn't exist at that consciousness plane, that consciousness can extend its existence back beyond the Big Bang.
Yeah, or you can think of the Big Bang coming from an earlier Big Bang, coming from an earlier Big Bang. I mean, it's constantly banging.
But now, if that consciousnss could extend itself back to the point of origin of the Big Bang, could that consciousness then direct the Big Bang and evolve itself?
Okay, but yes, the difficulty there is that when you use the terminology consciousness, it's typically undefined. You know, what do you mean by consciousness? You know, in a dictionary, it's defined as something like a level of self-awareness. But so are you saying that the universe is self-aware? I believe so. I think it is. I think it's self-aware at all levels. But what is self-awareness? What is the mechanics of like this is the key to understanding what we mean when we say consciousness. Otherwise, we basically replace the word God from religions to consciousness, which doesn't say much more. So in order for systems to self-organize, in order for matter to come to be, in order for matter to organize in such a way that it produces the complexity of a human being with 1,000 billion chemical change every second, a million cell division every second, all this stuff that's happening for you to be alive right now. In order for that to happen, there must be feedback in the system. It has to be able to learn about itself, because under random functions, it doesn't happen. Like if you do the math, if the universe is completely random, there's no way, not even microbial life would be here at this point. I mean, the complexity is so high. But if you have feedback, then the complexity occurs very rapidly.
But what I'm asking is, this feedback loop, okay, let's say the evolution of our species, this feedback loop, can it extend backwards in time and improve itself?
Yes.
In other words, what I'm saying is, can consciousness go back in time and direct its own self-evolution?
Right. I mean, there's another few key concepts there that have to be put in place. For instance, when you say the word time, you know, what do you mean by that? It's a complex concepts in physics even. You know, it's undefined really in physics. What is time? Do you mean tick, tick, tick on the clock? What do you mean? And so I actually changed this terminology and I modified Einstein. Sorry, Einstein, I'm sure he's happy with it. But I modified space-time to space memory, because no memory, no time. You know, if you can't remember what happened before, you don't know that there's a linear function of time, that there's a linear arrow of time. And if time is fundamental to the universe, that means memory is fundamental to the universe. And that means that information is embedded on the structure of space. And this is actually the root of the question you're asking. That is, information is embedded on the structure of space as the dynamic of space happen, meaning as things happen in the universe, it leaves imprints of what has happened before that makes it appear to be a linear structure of time, evolution.
It leaves imprints,
yes.
So this means any species that's evolving into its next version already knows the version it's going to become. So it's in a way self-directed.
It is. It's self-directed fundamentally from the universal level, and that's why it's organized, meaning the universe didn't make a bee on another planet somewhere and the flower on this one, because they would never meet and it would be terrible. But it puts it on the same planet, right?
Okay, so that's a really interesting idea. And so guys, I know we went into a completely different direction, but it's an intriguing direction. So now the question is, can our consciousness go back into our timeline and correct things? Is there a way, or is there a method you found where one's human consciousness can somehow influence the trajectory from the time that human being is born and influence our future into now directly?
Yeah, I think we do it all the time. I mean, I think we that's what we do. We modify the past to produce the next moment in our future.
So we modify our past to produce the next moment in our future.
In our future, and that leads as well to the possibility of modifying our future to produce a specific occurrence in our present, so that we can visualize a specific future that we desire, and then work the information backward to make us today what we need to be to achieve that future.
Wow, that's a very interesting way of observing what people call the law of attraction.
Right, but it's a deeper level of it, because now you start to get the mechanics on how you can get it to do.
Right.
Yeah, and so it's really important. I mean, that's the base of psychology, isn't it? That you think of your past, you discuss your past and certain events of your past with someone else that might give you a different optics on it, maybe give you some suggestion on how you can experience that moment that happened in the past in a different way. And when you do, then that has a forward impact on your present, which will influence your future. So yeah, I totally believe we influence the past, because the past is really information on the structure of space that we have left, like a record on the electromagnetic fields of space in space-time, literally. And I mean it literally, just like information on a CD-ROM that's been laid on the magnetic structure, or on the optic structure of the CD-ROM. So it really changes the view that we have of past, present, and future, because it puts it in the context of information.
So we're in a particular timeline of self-awareness right now.
Yes.
And what you're saying is our consciousness has the potential to influence our past, thus evolving our timeline.
That's right.
But if it did so, we wouldn't realize it, would we? Because we would be in a different timeline.
Right. Well, we basically would realize it, because by the time you've made the modification and changed your timeline, you still have a link to that moment before, when you were someone else. And that's what makes your evolution. So it is the same timeline. It's just that you're feed forwarding to that moment that keeps changing, and that makes up your timeline.
So that's so intriguing. And at the same time, we can move our consciousness into the future.
Yes.
Through what? Through visualization? Through thoughts of the future?
Yes, through, so think of, first of all, you're laying information on the structure of space-time, because you're never in the same coordinates in space-time every billionth of a second. You're moving in coordinates in space-time, literally, like you're on the Earth, the Earth is spinning around the sun is spinning around the galaxy, so you're making a huge spiral in space, right? So within a year, you're billions and billions of kilometers away from where you were last year in space. And you've laid information on that spiral all the way through. And that's still linked to you, it's entangled with you, so you can go backwards and visualize the past, but you can, and that's what you call your memory, by the way. That's why they can't find it in the brain. It's because it's not in the brain. You're like an antenna tuned into that set of information.
Okay, so firstly, this is intriguing. To help you understand the spiral, I'm going to play a short video clip that shows the visualization of how you as an entity are moving through space-time. It really is as a spiral. You'll see, because the Earth's going around the sun, and the sun itself is moving. So okay, so that again opens up a whole can of worms.
So you're doing a spiral. So now you can visualize what the spiral is going to be forward in time, and you can visualize what you'd like to be like at a certain moment of time. You could lay that information on the structure of time forward in those coordinates, and that will have a backward impact from that moment, that future moment, to your present, and start changing your present to achieve that result in that future moment.
So the point of point consciousness, the point of our consciousness in this particular time is able to influence our future, but also influence our past.
That's right.
And this is another way, and I know personal growth philosophers call this law of attraction or thought creating reality. So you accept that idea?
Absolutely, in the context of the mechanics, of the physics that I just described.
But let's go deeper, because this is really interesting, because we a lot of us watching would, I'd say 99% of the people watching believe that their thoughts of the future will influence their future. And you described it in a particularly beautiful way, taking into account what we know about quantum physics. But what I think is a harder concept to grasp is how our thoughts of the past can influence the present.
If their memory imprint on the structure of space, they're still there. Each moment, each Planck seconds, which is 10 to minus 24 seconds.
Can one be trained to go back in time to
Absolutely.
influence childhood memories and childhood events, so that, say, today we have higher self-esteem or we have more confidence?
Absolutely, I totally believe that. And again,
Have you done it?
Yes, I have, and I've trained people to do it, and I got amazing results in some cases.
So this sounds really intriguing. Is this something you could share with us?
Sure. At one point, I lived with two young, beautiful little girls that were, the daughters of my partner, and they were making fun of my nose all the time because I had a larger bump on my nose.
Right.
And I made a very bold statement one night at supper time. I told them that I would change my nose by morning. And by morning time, and they just start laughing, and they said, "What, you gonna go and get plastic surgery tonight?" Or, and they were making fun of me. And I said, I'll bet you that I can do it. So they gathered, they broke their guinea pig, their
piggy bank.
Their piggy bank, and they gathered like $20 and something and bet me everything they had that I couldn't change my nose. And I thought it was cute. So I worked that night in my meditation at going backwards. And so you can follow the spiral backwards of your timeline. And eventually, if you go far enough, you'll end up in the belly of your mom where you were. And that'll connect you to the spiral of your mom. Since your dad was in your mom for a few minutes, right, when you were conceived, then you can connect to that spiral as well. Right. And so you can go backwards into the spirals, and I did. I went backwards into the spirals as far as I could see, and found the gene that produced that larger bump on my nose. And I modified it. I put an intent of changing the information there.
Right.
And it had a forward effect that was so dramatic that when I walked into the kitchen in the morning for breakfast, the girls started screaming and walked out the door. They were scared of me.
Because your nose had changed.
My nose had changed, yeah.
But that sounds insane. So how are you doing that?
It was a little wild. Okay. I didn't think it was going to work that well.
How long in meditation did that take?
A good hour, maybe an hour and a half. I don't remember.
Hour and a half?
Yeah.
And is that a technique that you can teach people?
Yes, I think in general people naturally can do it because it's a physical occurrence that's occurring like every second in their day. So it's actually the way things work. So people naturally can visualize it when they have the right mechanics, when they understand the mechanics. It's natural for people to be able to visualize it and go backwards. And it literally, for me anyway, looked like a thread through space, like a crystal thread through space, like a geometric crystal thread. And I could see, for instance, moment of trauma in my life and so on, I could see the thread being fractured or being more opaque in those regions, and I could see that I could, by changing the angles of the crystals, by changing the vectors in the crystals, I could repair the thread. I could make it more consistent, more crystalline, more translucent.
So you're visualizing the thread, and I believe you're setting an intention to see a representation of trauma or representation of anything that's something you might want to fix as a distortion in the crystal.
Right.
But I'm guessing someone who's doing this could ask for any other sort of representation. They could ask for a representation in terms of color or anything else. Right, because it's the subconscious mind that's delivering that.
Maybe you could see the change in colors. I mean, there was definitely, from what I could visualize, a change in
opacity.
Opacity, like more, where there was more trauma, the crystal looked more opaque than where it was more smooth and more translucent. So there might be color change you could see as well. I think that it's not so much what you intend to see, but it's just trying to link into the thread and just experiencing it, following the thread and experiencing it.
How often do you do that? How often do you go back and rewrite your past to shape your present reality?
Well, I think
do you just do it to make $20 from little kids?
No, but I definitely, I think that we do it naturally, continuously, on a micro level, meaning we do little things, like we keep thinking about things that we did this morning or things that we did, yesterday and so on, and we're constantly kind of massaging it, and it's changing us in the moment.
Or even personal growth modalities like rescripting, thinking about a past trauma or abuse and rescripting. You're saying that's a micro change in what we'll experience
Exactly.
today.
Like maybe we had a rough morning. The kids were sick, we couldn't get to work, then there was traffic, maybe we had a rough morning and we arrive at work and maybe we're in a bad mood or we're having a difficult time. And maybe we stop for a second and we decide we're not going to continue.
You're going to reframe it.
We're going to reframe all this. And so when you do that, basically you're changing the information in the past, right, in that morning, so that you're having a different experience of the same event. So that,
Right, so that's bizarre. But it's so intriguing.
It's profound. I think it has profound meaning. And
I think the one thing that the audience needs to grasp, which might be slightly challenging, is the concept of time, or as you call it, space memory.
Right.
That time doesn't exist, that we as Homo sapiens perceive time as being linear, but time is happening all the time, everywhere.
Everywhere at the same time, and that links very much with many of the ancient cultures, tradition, the Western, the Eastern traditions and all this that talk about every moment being present, that there's only presence. And so, there's only presence because every moment is just information on the structure of space. So every bit of information is a present in that coordinates in space-time. And all these presents, one after the other, makes up a linear concept of time.
And it reminds me of that time. So many of you watching may have heard of Neil Donald Walsh. And Neil Donald Walsh, in his books, Conversations with God, talks about a similar concept. The idea that time doesn't exist, right? That we exist all at once, all the time. And he does it in the concept, in the metaphorical concept of conversing with the universe, with God. Now, what was really interesting is, one of the most fascinating, if not the most fascinating dinner I ever had was when Nassim and Neil were at dinner together with me and some of my friends, and observing them talking about this. Neil Donald Walsh, the spiritual philosopher, Nassim, the scientist. It was one of the first times in my life I was just sitting there, quiet, not able to interject anything. But it was amazing to see how you're coming from a science angle, Neil's coming from a spiritual angle, and both you guys can
We arrive
connect.
at the same place.
Right.
That's
So-
why I told him that the God that he was having conversation with is probably a good physicist.
Brilliant, right? And I
right.
remember you were telling Neil that you thought it was brilliant how in his writing he takes complex physics and he simplifies it into
Right.
something so easy
That's
to
right.
understand.
Yeah.
Now, why I'm bringing this up is because a good interview to listen to after this one, a good session, is the one I had with Neil Donald Walsh. It's also part of the same program. Listen to that, and it's a good follow-up because it'll go deeper on this topic. So we spoke about influencing the past with our mind.
Right.
What about influencing the future?
Right. So influencing the future, so you can imagine you are going to lay information on the structure of space-time as you move through space to a specific future. Those coordinates in space that you're going to move to, they're going to be defined by your movement in the space from this moment to that moment in the future. And those movements you do in the structure of space are going to be defined by your actions, how you do things, what you do, and how you do them, and how you feel about yourself and everything else. So you can imagine that you can lay a set of information in the future, an intent of a specific outcome in the future, and then and that space-time then would have to coordinate all the moments in between that moment and your current present to make that specific event occur. So it would start changing the information backwards to your present, and that would change your present. So you would become what you need to be. It gives you an idea of a deeper understanding of how to produce or how to create a specific outcome.
So Nassim, next question, multiverses. Let's say me and my son Hayden have different intentions for the future, okay? And I want to live in Spain. He wants to end up living in London. Now, what happens in that scenario if we are both directing our thoughts towards this reality? Does the universe split? And he ends up with a version of me in London, and I end up with a version of him in Spain.
Okay, well, I actually don't believe that. I believe that the universe resolves always to the highest energy level. And so that's why when you intend something in the future, it typically doesn't occur exactly how you had intended it, right? Maybe you intended to have this wonderful red Camaro, and you end up with some like a Camaro, but it's a blue one, or and you learn to love blue Camaros instead of red ones,
because all our consciousness are influencing a shared future.
That's right.
And this is why we cannot choose to win the lottery.
That's right. Or choose to turn down the heat on the sun because it's too hot today, because the guy in Alaska would freeze, right?
Right.
So we have a common, we live in a common universe, a common reality, and so the universe resolved to the highest energy level.
And so group consciousness is playing a role over here.
Exactly. That's why group consciousness can have a large influence.
That's very interesting, and I can see how this can have implications in organizations as well. So for those of you listening, I predict that within 10 years, business management experts will be talking about group consciousness in organizations, people meditating together and setting intentions together for the products and the services they want to bring to the market. If you want to explore that topic as part of this consciousness engineering program, check out my conversation with Reagan Hillier. She's a 28-year-old entrepreneur who has brought this into a company, and she talks about what happens when you have an entire company practicing group consciousness at the start of every month. So back to group consciousness. So this is intriguing. Now, how can we as human beings use group consciousness to create a better shared future?
Well, that's the thing. So you can imagine that you can think of these sets of information, and you can call it in the morphogenetic field of the planet, as group intentions, collective behavior that coordinates toward a very specific future. And you can become aware of which group you're participating in. You can become aware of which thread, which information thread, which energy you are participating in, and then increase your influence in a particular direction for the planetary evolution, for the global social evolution. And so it becomes very conscious engineering of the global evolution as an individual participating in it.
Now, is group consciousness always moving us forward in the most efficient path? Because, I mean, we see examples of horribly dangerous group consciousness. I mean, let's look at what happened with Nazi Germany, right?
Right.
In the 1940s.
Yes.
So group consciousness isn't always aligned along the best and most ideal path, is it?
Right, it can be quite self-destructive.
And it can be hijacked.
Absolutely, and it has been in our society right now, definitely, towards a very specific outcome.
Well, give us an example. What do you mean by that?
Well, in our current society, there's been a very strong capacity to influence global awareness by, producing very specific information sets in our media and the way we think of things and so on. And there's been a huge influence on the group consciousness of our planet that way.
Right. If you look at, for example, the mass amounts of media ad spend on influencing politics. Right now, I was just speaking to some IT experts here who are studying this field, and the number is $5 billion. $5 billion are spent by political parties influencing human behavior. And that is just in the United States alone. And of that $5 billion, the vast majority is on the right. The left really is quite incompetent at using that. At least that's what these IT experts are saying. But $5 billion is being spent to sway the group consciousness of Americans.
Right, sure. So that's one way that you can look at it, or in a grosser way. But you have to make a distinction there, because when you use the terminology not the most efficient way or destructive way, we go through very important phases of evolution, very important moments of growth. And these moments of growth are not always pretty. Right. They're not always nice. They might be difficult moments. And that's when we grow the most. So for instance, in a certain instant, we can look at a certain moment in our history and say that was a horrible moment. But if you look on a longer timeline, on a longer evolutionary thread, you can see that moment was really critical for us to learn very critical lessons.
Is that so?
Right.
So the reason I'm pressing on that point is because we are here in the city of Tallinn, and the reason I brought up Nazi Germany is because this city was invaded by the Nazis, hundreds of thousands of people killed, and then the Soviets invaded to fight the Nazis. They killed 300,000 people, and they bombed and destroyed 1/3 the city. And I think to the average Estonian living here, including my family, we lost family members. We had we had great grandparents murdered, their bodies never found.
It's horrifying.
How do we see the good in that?
Well, that's the thing. If you can't see the good in that, then there's a good chance you're going to repeat it. Because then there will be, frustration, anger, all kinds of things that you're pulling along with that thread.
But surely we can forgive. I mean, right? I mean, today here in Tallinn, you get people from all around the world. We have World War II memorials, but how can we see the good in what happened during World War II when our people were killed?
I think the only way you can forgive at the deepest level is to understand the lesson that it gives us ultimately, right? if you want to forgive at the deepest level some of the horrible thing that has happened either in history or in your current lifetime, somebody might have got raped, they might have got, beat up or whatever, if we're able to forgive at the deepest level, and in my life, in my childhood, I had some very traumatic moments that I had to go through that exercise with. I think is to see the lessons that, even if I was a victim at the time, meaning I was a child, I didn't know what was going on, what was necessary in these moments for me to be who I am today. If I'm able to do that individually or globally, meaning in history, then I'm able to completely let go of any feeling of resentment or anger and frustration relative to those moments. Then I extract the lesson from the information set. And so moments in history, information on the structure of space-time, as a result of a global evolution towards higher level of consciousness, will most likely involve moments that are not beautiful, that are not pretty, that are very difficult. But if we can see the larger context, then I think we can totally see the beauty even in those moments.
So if consciousness from the future is going back and writing history as it moves along, what you're saying is that consciousness has a plan. And sometimes in the process of writing this history, there is a beautiful destruction, to use the terminology from my book, that is created to create a more beautiful future.
That's right.
And from the perspective of the people on that timeline, World War II, or even further back, the Mongol invasion of the Muslim Empire in 1220, those things are horrible times.
Yes.
However, as much suffering as happens over here, and while we should not forget that suffering,
right,
and we should remember the suffering,
right,
there is a positive path forward that's going to emerge from that, and we should trust that positive path forward.
Exactly.
For example, World War II led to the creation of the European Union and this new borderless society that we are in right now.
Right, right, and it begs a deeper question and a deeper answer, is there evil? Is this such a thing as evil? And I've always, because I've been asked that question many times, I've always answered, absolutely not. No baby is ever born evil. Right. You don't have, it's not a fundamental structure of the universe that there is evil, but there's evolution, and so there's shades of gray, right? There's shades of gray, and so there's levels of confusion, and there's levels of awareness, and they're related to each other in that, in order to reach higher levels of consciousness, higher levels of awareness, there's certain moments of deep darkness that occurs along the way, so that the light can shine through them.
Okay, but this opens up another can of worms, right? What this means when you say you don't believe there's evil, and by the way, this is not an unusual statement. Neil Donald Walsh, I'm bringing back Neil because we all know each other, in his famous book, The Little Soul and the Sun, which is actually a children's book, suggested something similar, right? One of the phrases he uses is, in the words of God, I have sent you nothing but angels. Everyone who has abused you, who have hurt you, was an angel in disguise, helping you get to the next level of your evolution. Now, it's a hard idea to grasp. You got to read this book. It's a 30-minute read, and it's an uncomfortable idea. You can tell if you're watching this that I'm feeling uncomfortable right now, because I know the suffering that my wife's family experienced during World War II, and to think that there was a greater plan for that makes me uncomfortable. But it's part, I guess it's part of us understanding.
Yeah, it doesn't undermine the tragedy and the difficulty that people went through, and the suffering that they went through. It just says that this led to actually a growth in human awareness, in human consciousness. So actually it extracts from it the beauty, the sacrifice these events and these people experience for us to be where we are today.
So this brings us to another understanding that whether Obama is the president or Trump is the president, there is a plan and a design in everything.
And so on an individual base, I mean, for me, when I remember these principles, even in times of darkness, meaning when I'm having a hard time, if I remember these principles, then even in the moments when I'm feeling down or I'm having a really hard day or a hard time, I can remember, okay, what is the lesson? Where is this bringing me? Why is this coming in my life and why am I experiencing this? Because there must be a higher purpose for me to experience this. There must be something I need to learn.
Right, right. Now, what would be your advice for the human race? Okay, let's say 1 billion people were watching this and we wanted to come together using group consciousness to create a better future for the human species and for all life on Earth. What would be your advice? How do we better direct our evolution as a species and as a planet?
I think for me, I mean, just because of what I do, so I'm going to give you an answer that'd be a little more technical because of what I do. I would love if I could get 1 billion people on the planet to visualize us being able to birth over unity technology into the world. That is devices that
what technology?
Over unity technology.
Over unity technology.
Yeah.
What is over unity technology?
Over unity technology is technology that extracts energy directly from the structure of space-time. That is, it creates more energy than it takes to run them. So
is that similar to zero-point field energy?
Yeah, exactly. And it extracts the energy from the so-called zero-point energy field. The structure of space-time is fluctuating with information, with energy, and we can extract that energy. Now we've succeeded, many inventors have succeeded around the world, but we've failed at bringing it into the public so far because of various political and financial interests. And so I would love for 1 billion people to put their intent in the over unity technology entering the world.
So let's talk about that, because that's fascinating as well. Zero-point field energy or over unity energy. It's the idea that within space-time, within space, in this tiny little bit of space in between my fingers, there's a massive amount of energy that's just sitting there.
Exactly, enough energy to run the world in that little...
But we can't extract it yet.
Actually...
You're saying we can?
Yeah, inventors have been capable of doing it for quite a bit of time.
So why aren't those inventions coming forth?
It has been... it's been arrested or slowed down significantly because of special interests and other forms of energy like oil and
Right.
natural gases and so on. And as well because humanity, and so that's one level of analyzing the history, but as well, and because I mean, since Tesla, we were on our way to having this kind of technology. But as well because if Tesla would have succeeded, or the inventors after him, I don't think humanity was ready for it. And
What was, so we're talking here about Nikola Tesla, for those of you watching, not Tesla cars.
Yes.
So we're talking about Nikola Tesla. I believe he died in 1933,
yeah,
sometime around there.
yes.
But what did he do to prove zero-point field energy, or to show that it was extractable?
Well, he succeeded partially at extracting some of it, or at using this field that he described as well, outside the context of zero-point energy as classically described in physics. But he used it to transmit energy without cables. He had multiple inventions in which he was interacting with this field, or he believed he was interacting. And he certainly birthed a whole investigation into the possibility of extracting that energy from the field. And people might think, well, how does that
And he
prove?
came close, right? But then he died in poverty.
Right.
He, for those of you who don't know, invented radio. It was credited to Guglielmo Marconi, but Tesla first theorized radio.
Yeah, correct. And Tesla invented almost most of the things we have in modern technology today. Some over 900 patents, and you know, the alternative current,
the AC current,
and so on. But as well, he you know, remote controls, all this stuff.
Right.
But he as well invented many things at, you know, at one point in his life that went against the social and economical interests of his funders and the people around him. And so he was taught, literally, and
he lost everything. He was sued. He died in poverty.
He died in poverty, almost unknown.
Right.
And his name was revived only in the last few decades
by Elon Musk, who named the Tesla car after him.
Right.
So let's go in a different direction. But let's talk about connection for a moment.
Well, that's the thing, is when you try to describe the physical world at the deepest level, you always run into this problem where you have to try to isolate the system that you're analyzing. And when you do, when you theoretically isolate it, you lose something. You can't understand the system at its most fundamental level if it's isolated. And that led me to write physics in which systems are not isolated, but they're connected.
Right. And
when I did that, when I showed that the proton, the nuclei of atoms, are actually all connected across the whole universe, and I extracted how the information is exchanged in this field of information, I got the right answer. I got the right answer for the mass of the proton, the radius of the proton, very, 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 very precisely, more precise than any other theory on the planet today. And the standard model is off by 4%. So it's a long shot away from how precise what I was able to extract. And so it says that everything is connected. Everything is entangled. All particles are entangled. Everything is in this metric of space that connects everything together. And what we call energy, what we call mass, what we call gravity, what we call electromagnetic fields is actually different modality on how the information is moving. If it's moving in, we call it gravity. If it's moving out, we call it electromagnetic field, and so on. And so it really gives us a different picture of the universe. And it gives us a picture of the universe in which it starts to make sense, that it would self-organize, that consciousness would emerge from it, that systems would have high level of relationship and complexity and produce biospheres. According to this view, not only everything is connected, but life should be teeming all over the universe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of gravity, I know you're doing some work on anti-gravity.
Yes, I don't call it like that. I call it gravity control, because anti-gravity would be like saying anti-light.
Right.
You know? So,
Gravity control.
Gravity control.
Tell us briefly, because this is so fascinating. I know we've had this conversation before, but tell us briefly about what you're doing with gravity control.
Well, the equations I wrote says something very specific about gravity. Einstein described gravity as in general relativity by describing space-time as being curved in a region of space where there's energy or mass. So if you put a mass on a trampoline, it will curve the surface, and another mass will appear to be attracted because the surface is curved. That's how Einstein described it. But he never said what space-time was made of. So at the fundamental level, we still don't know what gravity is. My equations showed that actually space-time is made of these little grains, these fluctuation of space-time, pixels of space-time, bits of information. And these bits of information, when they rotate together, when they're coordinated in their rotation, produce curvature. Just like the surface of water going down the drain in your bath appears to be curved, and a rubber ducky would orbit there, right? But it's only curved because all the water molecule, the bits of water are rotating in that region of space. That's what I discovered, and so you can imagine that very quickly you can go towards engineering a curvature in space. You can think, if I can couple to the space, to those bits of information, and get them to rotate in this region of space, I can create curvature.
And thus you create gravity.
Then I can control gravity.
You can control gravity.
Yeah,
and
which
now,
is
now,
the
and
next
how do you
step for the
curve
evolution.
space-time? I know you told me it's about plasma.
Yeah, so how are you going to couple to space-time? Well, plasma, which is some 99% of the universe is plasma.
And plasma is one of the states of matter.
Yeah, it's like a highly energized state of gas. You can get it in a certain state in which it starts to couple to space-time. And in that state, if you rotate it at very high velocity, space-time will start to orbit in that region of space, and you will start curving space-time. So since 1999, I've been doing experiments.
Taking plasma, rotating plasma at rapid velocity to curve space-time.
Exactly.
What was the result?
Well, I've got really good results so far, and so I'm on my way, but I have not been able to finish.
To get it to the next level.
Yeah, so I'm in the middle of doing that right now.
Now, if decades from now, we were able to fully harness the power of plasma rapidly rotating and curving space-time, what would that look like to the human species? What would that allow us to do?
Okay, well, so it's not going to be decades from now. It's going to be in the next 10 years.
Right.
And I'm not the only one working on it. NASA is working on it, and Sonny White at NASA is being somewhat successful with it as well, and other laboratories around the world. What will it look like? It will look like what you think of when you think of spaceships.
So we're talking about it'll give us the warp drive.
It will give us a warp drive, exactly.
Wow.
It will allow us to travel at least through our solar system, most likely inside our galaxy even, and maybe across galaxies in our universe. And it's not far off. And it's the next important evolution in humankind.
So it gives us the warp drive. So we now are able to control gravity. So at a lower cost than even SpaceX send cargo and spaceships to space.
Yeah.
But what about time? What about the distance between us and our closest stars? I mean, that's still a lot of light years. I don't know the exact number.
Right. Well, it will allow us to have cars that levitate. It will, gravity control will change everything we do. So you will be able to go to Jupiter for the weekend and come back.
But how long would that trip take?
Well, to Jupiter, not very long.
So it's not just gravity control, but it's acceleration.
Acceleration, very high level of acceleration with no G-force, no inertial force inside the craft.
And would we be able to break the speed of light? Or
I
approach
think
the speed of light?
Exceed the speed of light.
That's 186,282 miles per second.
Right. I believe it will. It will in...
So you think we can exceed light speed?
Yes.
So what you're saying, Nassim, is that the intersection of these two technologies, gravity control and harnessing energy from the zero-point field, will really create this spectacular new age of Star Trek for humanity.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Star Trek. All of our technology we have today was in science fiction long before it was invented and discovered.
I mean, in Star Trek, you guys remember the what's it called, the tricorder?
Right.
We have that now with our iPhones.
Exactly. And so, that's what I was saying earlier, is that what we visualize in our future, we achieve.
Right.
And so you can look at science fiction today and warp drive and space travel and all this, and you can imagine that we're gonna...
It's inevitable.
It's inevitable. We're gonna get there. And we are getting there, and it is the next step in the evolution of humanity. We learn to control electromagnetic fields to get to the point where we are today, and the next step is to learn to control gravitational fields. And until recently, we didn't know how gravity is actually produced by the universe, how gravity and what is mass. And these new equations that we are writing are starting to give us a bigger and deeper understanding of mass and gravity. And that leads to the technology of being able to control gravitational fields, birth our society into a space colony, and, and beyond.
Amazing, Nassim. So let's end on that note. That was one of the most mind-expanding conversations I've had, hopefully for you guys as well. Thank you so much for joining us here at Mind Valley.
Thank you for having me.
And where can people find out more about your work?
They can go to Resonance, and we have a website there where we publish daily science news. They can participate in our course online at the Resonance Academy. And there's like 90 countries involved, thousands of students, and it's a lot of fun.
Amazing.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you, Nassim. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you enjoyed these ideas, why not dive into Mind Valley's spiritual category? For the price of Mind Valley membership, which is less than $1 a day, you get access to hundreds of the top programs in the world. And Mind Valley spiritual category is actually one of our biggest categories. You will learn from incredible spiritual teachers, the Reverend Michael Beckwith, Donna Eden, Jeffrey Allen, Christy Marie Sheldon, Marie Diamond, all on one platform. And the best part about Mind Valley is, look, when I was getting started with personal growth, I remember buying individual courses for almost $249 to $500 a course. Mind Valley gives you 100 programs for the price you would have paid for one program just 7 years ago. So go ahead and check it out at Mind Valley Membership.